today's movie review. Once again, we get to cover another movie based on the novel by S.E. Hinton, which is, for today's movie review, is The Outsiders. Yes, The Outsiders is basically directed by Francis Ford Coppola, who brought you Bram Stoker's Dracula and the Godfather movies. And most of all, which what Francis Ford Coppola is known for, his films he worked on, such I believe it was Peggy Sue Got Married and Apocalypse Now, which I think he did, I believe, as well. So, yes, the movie is basically an adaptation of the 1967 novel of the same name by S.E. Hinton, and was released on March 25th, 1983 in the United States as well. And yeah, there is basically of how you expect as well for the movie, like to expect, given it is what it explain what it is about the outsiders, what Francis Ford Coppola had a lot to do with as well. When Francis Ford Coppola made The Outsiders in 1983, he was in the midst of yet another career paradigm shift, having broke the bank on the gargantuan semi-failures. Apocalypse Now and One from the Heart, he turned into adapting a pair of S.E. Hinton novels, which he hyperbolically termed Camus for Kids. For the first one, this was then the Rumblefish as well. Yeah. The Outsiders was relatively cheap and also brought Coppola back to a human drama that his post-Godfather work had been lacking. The result in rapturing a good number of teens and preteens in the 1980s, which Coppola can never leave well enough alone. Yeah. Though it's so. Now we have his new version, the complete novel, overall, in a case in the point for directors not being allowed to do this sort of thing as well. The original film, The Outsiders, takes Hinton's spare 1967 novel of young gangs in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and turns it into a grand melodrama with gorgeous cinemascope sunsets, sweeping orchestral score, or teen scuffles that take on all the clashing importance of medieval battles. On the crap side of town live the working class greasers with their black t-shirts and slicked back hair, as well as how you call it, a pompadour or hair slick back, whatever you want to call it. Always getting hassled by the socks, preppy bastards with family money and nicer cars. The film centers on the greasers, particularly the sensitive 13-year-old orphan pony boy Curtis, played by Thomas Howell, who lives with his older brother Soda Pop, played by Rob Lowe, and Daryl, played by Patrick Swayze, who is known for Red Dawn, Dirty Dancing, Roadhouse, and Ghost, I believe he was in. The surrogate family hanging around the Curtis ramshackle house also includes Emilio Estevez and Tom Cruise, while their friend Born to Loose Dally Winston, played by Matt Dillon, who has just been released from jail. Almost as childlike as Ponyboy is as his best friend Johnny, played by Ralph Macchio, who is known for the Karate Kid movies. An angelically bruised kid from a troubled home who provides the film's most emotional moments as well. The storyline is an erratic one at the best, though it starts well after a full night of run-ins with the Sox. Ponyboy and Johnny finally get cornered by them in the park, where Johnny knives one to death in self-defense, of how you expect to see in this particular movie based on S.E. Hinton's classic novel, particularly, as well. How you expect it to explain what it is in The Outsiders. They head out of town with the help from conventionally knowledgeable Dally, hiding in a remote, abandoned church, where they cut their hair, read Gone with the Wind, watching the sunsets and wait for the heat to die down. A chain of tragedy follows, from a fire to a climatic rumble in the rain to heart-wrenching hospital scenes, none of it ending well for the kids. From the wrong side of the tracks, while much of it may seem laughable at times to older viewers, there is an undeniable primal quality to the film's portrait of perennially disenfranchised poor kids. The heart-rending quality of Johnny Macchio's wide, terrified eyes are hard to shake. It is like something out of Dickens as well. What Coppola did in his initial cut of odd 90 minutes was to prune away some of the book character building scenes, which didn't play out too well with his inexperienced but powerfully energetic and Adonis gorgeous cast. For all those who complained about the films being not faithful enough to the source material, to explain how what Francis Ford Coppola engaged it in about 20 minutes of material, some good and some bad, either in one way or the other. which he had a lot to deal with. Or for one of the credibility of the better additions is the fleshing out of the opening sequence, in which Pony Boy is tailed by Socks home from the movie theater, providing now a better introduction to his fringe, alienated world. Worse is the padding added to the end, including a long trial scene and an undully tidy wrap up with the three Curtis boys. Nothing damages Coppola's initial vision, however, as much as his removing the score done by his father Carmine in the original film. The lush symphonies work with the beautiful cinematography to give the story of how, which could seem and slight inconsequential to some, a timeless quality punching up the already wonderful florid emotions to an appropriately rebel without a cause level way, which is probably in those days as well. Same with now the complete novel cut uses almost entirely rock music of the era, including a half dozen Presley tunes and far too much surf guitar. This works on occasion, especially early on in the film, but as it goes on, the new music cues strip away the overheated feelings that Carmine's score evoked, and actually make some previously moving sequences almost laughable. But the result is a film that can't decide if it's a teen exploitation flick or a classic story of alienation, and ends up being neither, either in particular way. Coppola hasn't managed to ruin his best film of the 80s. This is too potent material for that, but he did seriously wound it as well. The complete novel is packaged in a nice 2-disc edition with a gorgeous new widescreen transfer, 2 additional scenes, and several excellent documentaries, including one about the California students who petitioned to Coppola gave him the initial idea to make the film as well. So that's the real thing for this particular film, like The Outsiders, is probably how it's adapted from Francis Ford Coppola's be part of his works, but not just the Godfather movies, but also, but particularly it's been adapted from S.E. Hinton's novel as well. I mean, the film has noted for its cast up upcoming stars, including C. Thomas Howell, who earned a Young Artist Award, or as many of the cast. I mean, the film helped to spark the Brat Pack genre of the 1980s. Both Lane and Dylan went on to appear in Coppola's related film Rumblefish. Dylan and Estevez also starred in Tex, I believe, which is within a year before The Outsiders, because The Outsiders was released on March 25th, 1983. Estevez went on to write and star in This Is Now, 2 years later, the only Hinton film adaptation not to star Dylan as well. I mean, the film has received mostly positive reviews from the critics, most notably for the performances, with Macchio being singled out for praise. The film performed well at the box office, grossing about $33.7 million on a $10 million budget, particularly. And yes, there's only 2 different minutes of The Outsiders in each versions. I mean, the complete novel version runs about an hour and 15 minutes, but the original theatrical cut has 91 minutes. Probably in the same way with The Warriors, with the director's cut, but it's basically like how they use these comic panel parts, like at the beginning of the movie, of how they use like those comic book transitions as well, particularly. But anyway, The Outsiders not only helps me have how interest with the story and the timeless classic feel, but it's also partially responsible for some fan commentaries in general. The Outsiders, however, this is particularly has 22 minutes of previously deleted footage, which is probably for the complete novel cut version of the film, which is particularly for one particular movie what The Outsiders had a lot to do with as well. For the filming of The Outsiders, the film was shot on location in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The filming took place from March 29th to May 15th, 1982, just before it was released in 1983, which is a year later for the filming dates as well. Unlike most of how directors, like what Francis Ford Coppola, wanted to film the location when they made The Outsiders as well. I mean, come to think of it, the house from The Outsiders, which is basically used for the filming, located at 731 Curtis Brothers Lane in Tulsa, Oklahoma, is basically now as a museum, which it features props from the film. Most of these other movies, like those houses, like how they were used for the filming for some certain movie as well, which is now becoming particularly a museum. which is a primary film set like such as the Curtis brothers' house from The Outsiders, which is in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It's basically called the Outsiders House Museum, which includes props from the movie, particularly just to honor the film, particularly if those who have seen The Outsiders, or to those who haven't who has never read the novel, have seen The Outsiders movie in a particular one way or the other, particularly of how the satisfactory results in development for The Outsiders, particularly. Francis Ford Coppola has not intended to make a film about Tina Gantz until Jo Ellen Makashian, a school librarian from Lone Star Elementary School in Fresno, California, wrote to him on behalf of her 7th and 8th grade students about adapting The Outsiders. Yeah, they were going to originally hire Mickey Rourke, Scott Baio, and Dennis Quaid for the roles in The Outsiders, but they passed instead, so they had actors like Ralph Macchio, Patrick Swayze, Tom Cruise, Emilio Estevez, and Rob Lowe, and Matt Dillon, particularly for the roles of how to get the job done, of how they wanted to do The Outsiders, particularly, because it's probably partial my interest for how to revisit this movie in general. So that's going to be it for my movie review on The Outsiders for today's movie review. Thank you for watching, but before we go, here's my thoughts on this. The story was excellent. It's very interesting. I gave this movie 5 out of 5 stars because it's an excellent classic, particularly. And that's the version I watch on DVD, which is the theatrical cut. Particularly, I can watch it again and again with a journey of how they made this movie. Francis Ford Coppola had a lot to do.